They say a man can give away a necklace in a second, but sometimes that single gesture costs him an empire. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Ballroom scattered rivers of golden light across polished marble floors as Manhattan's elite gathered beneath ceilings painted with old-world elegance. Waiters moved silently through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne, while a string quartet filled the air with soft music that seemed to float between conversations worth millions of dollars. At the center of it all stood Camille Brooks Vale, her deep brown skin glowing beneath the warm lights, her posture calm and graceful despite the weight of hundreds of eyes around her. Tonight marked the 15th anniversary of Vale Dominion Group, one of the most powerful financial empires in America, and everyone had come to celebrate the man who built it. Or at least, that was what they believed. Camille stood near the grand staircase wearing a midnight black gown that flowed like liquid silk around her frame. The dress was elegant rather than flashy, the kind of confidence that never needed attention because it naturally commanded it. Around her neck rested a necklace unlike any other piece of jewelry in the room. A delicate chain of white gold held a rare sapphire surrounded by diamonds, catching the light with every movement. To the guests, it looked expensive. To Camille, it was priceless. The necklace had belonged to her mother. It was the last gift she received before cancer took her away 20 years earlier. Her mother had once held the sapphire between her fingers and whispered words Camille never forgot. Never let anyone convince you that your worth depends on what they think of you. Through every chapter of her life, those words had remained. Through college, through long nights building business plans beside Preston, through years of sacrifice while helping transform a small investment company into a global empire. The necklace had witnessed everything. A photographer approached and asked for a picture. Camille smiled politely. Flashbulbs illuminated her face. Across the ballroom, giant screens displayed images celebrating Vale Dominions. History. Preston's face appeared again and again. Preston signing deals. Preston ringing the stock exchange bell. Preston standing beside presidents and governors. Preston accepting awards. Preston building an empire. The narrative was simple. Preston Vale was the genius. Preston Vale was the visionary. Preston Vale was the king. Few people noticed the woman standing quietly near the staircase. Fewer still knew how many foundations beneath that empire carried Camille's fingerprints. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You look beautiful tonight." Camille turned and found Preston approaching through the crowd. At 44, he remained striking in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His confident smile still possessed the charm that had once made her believe they could conquer the world together. The room seemed to shift around him, powerful people greeting him with admiration and respect. He kissed her cheek lightly before turning toward another group of investors already waiting for his attention. The gesture was practiced, polished, public, yet somehow distant. Camille watched him walk away and felt a strange chill despite the warmth surrounding her. For months, something had been changing. Small things at first. Missed dinners, late meetings, conversations that ended too quickly, smiles that no longer reached his eyes. Nothing dramatic, nothing she could prove, yet enough to leave shadows where certainty once lived. Outside the towering windows, Manhattan sparkled against the night sky. The city looked endless, powerful, untouchable, much like the empire Preston believed belonged entirely to him. Camille gently touched the sapphire resting against her collarbone and gazed across the ballroom. Somewhere beyond the music and applause, beyond the champagne and celebration, beyond the illusion of perfection surrounding this evening, fate was already moving. And before the clock struck midnight, everything would change. The applause grew louder as Preston stepped onto the elevated stage position beneath a massive crystal chandelier that seemed to hang like a crown over the ballroom. Screens behind him illuminated with the company logo while executives, investors, politicians, and celebrities turned their attention toward the man they believed had built everything before them. Preston smiled with the confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. The room responded exactly as expected. Glasses were raised. Cameras flashed. Laughter floated through the air like music. Camille remained near the staircase, observing quietly. Years earlier, she would have stood proudly beside him during moments like this. Tonight felt different. There was a distance she could not explain, a silence hidden beneath the celebration. Preston thanked shareholders, board members, and business partners. He spoke about growth, vision, leadership, and the future. Every sentence was polished. Every gesture was perfect. Yet as Camille listened, she noticed something unsettling. For the first time in 15 years, Preston never mentioned her. Not once. The omission was subtle enough that most people would never notice. But she noticed. She always noticed. A woman suddenly appeared near the front of the stage. Tall, elegant, wrapped in a silver designer gown that shimmered beneath the lights. Serena Whitmore. Camille recognized her immediately. Serena had recently become a familiar presence at company events. Officially, she was a branding consultant working on a new public relations initiative. Unofficially, rumors seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Preston welcomed her with a smile that lingered slightly too long. Serena stepped onto the stage. The audience applauded politely. Camille felt a strange tightening in her chest. Not jealousy. Instinct. The same instinct that had warned her something was changing months ago. Preston accepted a small velvet box from an assistant. The crowd leaned forward curiously. The moment appeared unscripted, yet somehow carefully planned. Serena laughed softly and shook her head as though surprised. Preston opened the box. The sapphire reflected the chandelier's light. Time seemed to pause. Camille's breath caught. Her fingers instinctively reached for her neck. Empty. For one impossible second, her mind refused to understand what her eyes were seeing. The necklace. Her necklace. Her mother's necklace. The sapphire she had worn earlier that evening now rested inside Preston's hand. A gift, offered publicly, to another woman. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Some guests exchanged confused glances. Others smiled, assuming they were witnessing an extravagant gesture. They did not know the story behind the necklace. They did not know its history. They did not know that a daughter had once held that sapphire while saying goodbye to her mother in a hospital room. Serena touched the jewel carefully, admiration sparkling across her face. Preston fastened it around her neck while cameras captured every second. The sapphire settled against silver fabric beneath the glow of 1,000 lights. The audience applauded again, louder this time. Camille remained motionless. The room suddenly felt colder despite the warmth of the chandeliers. Across the ballroom, Preston's eyes briefly found hers. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. Only for a moment. Then it disappeared behind practiced confidence. Camille stared at the necklace resting on Serena's neck. The symbol her mother had entrusted to her. The symbol of family, of sacrifice, of dignity. Around her, the celebration continued. Music played. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. No one noticed that something invisible had just shattered. Camille slowly lowered her hand from her throat. Her expression remained calm, composed, almost serene. But deep inside, a door had quietly closed. And somewhere beyond the ballroom windows, Manhattan's midnight skyline waited patiently for the woman everyone had underestimated. The music continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Violins floated through the ballroom. Crystal glasses reflected golden light. Wealthy guests resumed their conversations, discussing stock prices, vacation homes, and political donations. Yet for Camille, the evening had already ended. She simply had not left the room yet. Standing beneath the chandelier, she watched Serena move gracefully among the guests, the sapphire resting against her neck as though it belonged there. Every flash of a camera felt distant now. Every smile around her seemed wrapped inside a world she no longer recognized. A woman from the board approached and complimented Serena on the beautiful necklace. Serena touched the sapphire and laughed softly. "Preston surprised me tonight," she said. "I did not expect something so meaningful." Meaningful. The word settled heavily in Camille's chest. Not because it hurt, because it clarified everything. Meaning was not something that could be transferred. Meaning lived in memory. Meaning lived in sacrifice. Meaning lived in the hands of a mother holding her daughter close during difficult days. The sapphire had never been valuable because of its price. It was valuable because of its story. And tonight, Preston had revealed exactly how little he understood that difference. Camille slowly turned away from the crowd. Her heels clicked softly against marble as she crossed the ballroom. No one stopped her. No one noticed her departure. That realization somehow felt more revealing than the necklace itself. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of partnership. 15 years of helping build a corporation worth billions. Yet somehow she had become invisible inside her own story. Near the ballroom entrance stood a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly beneath the darkness, illuminated by thousands of lights. Camille paused there for a moment. Reflected in the glass, she could still see the celebration behind her. Preston stood surrounded by admirers. Serena smiled beside him. Investors laughed at his jokes. Photographers followed his movements. The king remained at the center of his kingdom. Camille studied the reflection quietly. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, not because she was sad, because she finally understood something that had been hidden for years. Preston believed power belonged to visibility. He believed titles created authority. He believed admiration created influence. But the strongest foundations were rarely visible. The deepest roots always grew underground. Her phone vibrated softly inside her evening bag. One message appeared on the screen. It came from Jonathan Mercer, her longtime attorney. The text contained only 4 words. Everything is prepared. Camille stared at the message for several seconds before locking the screen again. Outside, the clock atop a nearby skyscraper displayed 11:37 p.m. 23 minutes until midnight. 23 minutes until a sequence of documents, signatures, and legal mechanisms years in the making would quietly awaken. No announcements. No dramatic confrontations. No public arguments. Just consequences. She slipped her wedding ring from her finger and held it in her palm. The diamond reflected city lights. Once, she had believed this ring represented forever. Now it represented a chapter. Nothing more. Nothing less. Carefully, she placed it inside her purse. Behind her, applause erupted again. Preston was giving another speech. The crowd loved him. They always had. Camille glanced over her shoulder one final time. Across the ballroom, the Blacktown car moved silently through Manhattan as midnight approached. Rain had begun to fall, soft droplets sliding across the windows like silver threads. Camille sat alone in the back seat, her posture calm, her hands resting lightly upon a leather portfolio that had traveled beside her for years. Inside were documents that few people had ever seen. Documents that carried no glamour, no headlines, no magazine covers. Yet they possessed something far more powerful than attention. They possessed truth. At 11:52 p.m., the car stopped in front of Mercer and Holloway, a law firm occupying the top floors of a granite tower overlooking the East River. The building appeared quiet at this hour, but lights still glowed inside several executive offices. Camille stepped into the lobby. Her heels echoed softly across polished stone. The security guard greeted her with immediate recognition and directed her toward a private elevator already waiting. No words were necessary. Everything had been arranged. Jonathan Mercer stood near the conference room windows when she arrived. Beyond the glass, the city shimmered beneath the rain. He offered a respectful nod. "We are ready." Camille placed her portfolio on the conference table. Around her sat attorneys, compliance officers, financial trustees, and representatives from 3 independent institutions. None of them looked surprised to see her. Unlike the guests at the gala, these people understood exactly who Camille Brooks Vale truly was. Jonathan opened the first folder. Inside rested copies of agreements signed years earlier during the earliest days of Vale Dominion Group. Back when Preston had little more than ambition and determination. Back when investors considered the company too risky. Back when banks refused financing. Camille remembered those years clearly. She had spent countless nights analyzing markets, restructuring debt models, developing acquisition frameworks, and negotiating partnerships. While Preston became the public face of the company, Camille quietly built the architecture beneath it. Her name rarely appeared in interviews. Yet her signatures appeared throughout the foundation of the empire. Jonathan carefully slid several pages across the table. The intellectual property trusts are confirmed. The holding entities are secure. The voting rights provisions remain fully enforceable. Camille reviewed each page. Every document reflected decisions she had made long ago. Decisions designed to protect the company from recklessness, betrayal, and concentration of power. At the time, Preston had agreed with every safeguard. Success simply caused him to forget they existed. A clock mounted on the conference room wall displayed 11:58 p.m. The atmosphere remained calm, professional, measured. No one celebrated. No one rushed. This was not revenge. Revenge was emotional. This was governance. Jonathan presented the final document. The transfer authorization. a mechanism triggered by violations of fiduciary obligations outlined years earlier within a confidential governance agreement. Camille signed her name with steady precision. One signature. 15 years of assumptions quietly unraveled. Around the table, additional signatures followed. Digital confirmations arrived from New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and London. Systems updated automatically. Notifications transmitted securely. Authority shifted through channels invisible to the public eye. Outside, thunder rolled faintly above the city. Midnight arrived. The second hand completed its circle. Somewhere across Manhattan, champagne still flowed inside the ballroom. Investors still toasted Preston's future. Serena still wore the sapphire necklace beneath crystal lights. None of them knew that at the exact moment the clock struck 12, the structure supporting Preston's throne had already moved beneath his feet. Camille closed the portfolio and rose from her chair. Jonathan looked at her carefully. "Are you certain?" Camille gazed toward the city skyline. Thousands of lights stretched into the darkness. Some represented dreams. Others represented illusions. "I have never been more certain of anything," she replied softly. And for the first time that evening, the future belonged entirely to her. At 6 a.m., the first signs appeared. The executive elevator inside Veiled Dominion Group refused access to Preston's credentials. He frowned at the screen, assuming it was a technical error. The celebration had ended late, and exhaustion still lingered behind his eyes. Around him, employees entered the lobby carrying coffee and laptops, preparing for another ordinary workday. Yet nothing about this morning was ordinary. Preston tried again. The access panel flashed red. Access denied. A security supervisor approached with visible discomfort. "Good morning, sir. There appears to be an update in the authorization system." Preston offered a short laugh. "Then call information technology and fix it." The supervisor nodded but did not move. Instead, he glanced toward his tablet. His expression grew increasingly uncertain. Upstairs, conference rooms were already filling with board members responding to urgent notifications delivered shortly after midnight. Legal teams reviewed revised governance documents. Compliance officers verified signatures. Financial institutions confirmed authority transfers. Every procedure followed protocol. Every step matched agreements established years ago. By 7:15 a.m., Preston finally reached his executive floor through a temporary escort authorization. The moment the elevator doors opened, something felt different. Conversations stopped. Assistants lowered their eyes. Even the atmosphere seemed altered. The confidence that normally greeted him had disappeared. His executive assistant, Melissa, stood beside his office holding a folder. Her hands trembled slightly. "There is an emergency board session scheduled for 8 o'clock. Preston loosened his tie. "What emergency?" Melissa hesitated. "You should review these documents first." He entered his office and placed the folder on the desk. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. For years this view had represented victory. Today it felt strangely distant. Preston opened the folder. The first page carried the letterhead of Mercer and Holloway. The second page contained governance provisions he had not seen in over a decade. The third page explained everything. His expression changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, then completely. He reread the paragraphs twice. 3 times. A 4th time. Each sentence remained exactly the same. Voting control had shifted. Executive authority had transferred. Several holding entities now reported to a new governing structure activated under pre-existing contractual conditions. The signatures were legitimate. The provisions were enforceable. The transfer was complete. For the first time in many years, silence filled the office. Not the silence of peace. The silence of realization. Preston pressed a button on his desk phone. "Get Jonathan Mercer on the line immediately." "He is unavailable, sir." "Then get Camille." The line remained quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Vale has declined all calls this morning." Outside his office, employees continued moving through hallways lined with photographs celebrating company milestones. Preston suddenly noticed something he had never truly seen before. In nearly every picture, Camille stood somewhere nearby, sometimes in the background, sometimes beside him, sometimes reviewing documents while others accepted applause. Invisible to most observers, essential to every success. His gaze drifted toward the skyline beyond the glass. Somewhere in the city, Camille was beginning her day. Calm, prepared, unshaken. While inside the headquarters he believed he controlled, the balance of power had already changed. The empire still stood exactly where it had stood yesterday. The difference was simple. It no longer answered to him. By 8 a.m., every seat inside the executive boardroom was occupied. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a gray Manhattan skyline as rain continued to sweep across the city. The atmosphere felt different from any meeting in the company's history. No one spoke unnecessarily. No one exchanged casual greetings. The confidence that once filled the room had been replaced by anticipation. Preston entered carrying a stack of legal documents. His expression remained controlled, but the tension in his jaw revealed the pressure building beneath the surface. For years, this room had functioned according to his rhythm. People waited for his arrival. People followed his direction. People sought his approval. This morning, something had changed. Several board members avoided direct eye contact. Others appeared unusually focused on the materials placed before them. At precisely 8:03 a.m., the doors opened again. Silence settled across the room. Camille entered without haste. She wore a tailored black suit accented by a single silver pin near her collar. Elegant, understated, unshakable. There was no sapphire necklace around her neck, no wedding ring on her hand. Yet somehow she appeared more powerful than she ever had during 15 years as Preston's wife. The room rose to its feet. Every board member, every executive, every legal representative. Preston remained seated. Camille acknowledged the gesture with a polite nod before taking her place at the head of the table. His chair, or rather, the chair everyone had assumed belonged to him. A large screen illuminated behind her. Governance documents appeared. Ownership structures followed. Voting rights schedules. Historical agreements. Compliance certifications. Independent audits. The presentation unfolded with calm precision. No accusations. No emotional speeches. Only facts. Each page revealed another layer of the foundation Camille had quietly constructed over the years. Several board members appeared stunned as they learned details even they had never fully understood. While Preston had become the public architect of the empire, Camille had spent years building the legal, financial, and strategic framework beneath it. Every major acquisition carried her signatures. Every protective trust reflected her design. Every safeguard traced back to her foresight. The realization spread slowly around the room. The empire had never belonged entirely to one person. It never had. Preston finally stood. "This is absurd." His voice remained measured, but frustration leaked through the edges. "You are presenting technicalities." Camille met his gaze calmly. "No, I am presenting reality." The words landed softly, yet they carried the weight of truth. The room remained silent. Preston opened one of the folders and flipped through pages. The same pages he had reviewed repeatedly all morning. He searched for flaws, loopholes, mistakes. There were none. Years ago, he had signed every agreement willingly because he trusted her completely. Success had convinced him that trust no longer mattered. Across the table, a senior director cleared his throat. All legal reviews confirmed the transition. Another board member nodded. The authority transfer is valid. One by one, confirmations followed. Not dramatic, not hostile, simply unanimous. Preston slowly lowered the documents. For the first time since entering the room, uncertainty replaced confidence. Camille looked around the table. She saw executives who had dedicated decades to the company, employees whose livelihoods depended upon stability, investors who expected leadership rather than chaos. This was never about destruction. It was about stewardship. Veiled Dominion Group will continue operating without interruption, she said calmly. Every commitment will be honored. Every employee will be protected. Every client will be served. The tension in the room eased immediately. Stability. That was what they had been seeking all morning. Outside the windows, clouds slowly began to separate. Thin rays of sunlight emerged above the city skyline. Inside the boardroom, the balance of power had fully shifted. And for the first time, everyone finally understood who had been carrying the weight of the empire all along. News traveled through Manhattan faster than the rain clouds that had covered the city that morning. By late afternoon, financial networks, business journals, and social media feeds all carried the same headline. Veiled Dominion Group had entered a new era of leadership. Analysts debated the implications. Investors studied the governance structure. Reporters searched for explanations. Yet the most remarkable detail remained the same. The woman now standing at the center of the story had spent years avoiding the spotlight. Camille arrived at headquarters the following morning just after sunrise. The glass tower reflected soft amber light across the streets below. Employees gathered near the entrance paused when they saw her step from the car. There was no entourage, no display of power, no dramatic announcement. She simply walked forward with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Inside the lobby, conversations softened. Some employees smiled. Others watched with curiosity. For years they had known her as the elegant wife who occasionally attended company functions. Few understood the depth of her influence. Fewer still knew how often her decisions had protected the organization during difficult years. As she crossed the marble floor, a young receptionist approached nervously. "Congratulations, ma'am." Camille smiled warmly. "Thank you. We have a lot of work ahead of us." The response spread quickly through the building. Not triumph. Not revenge. Work. Stability. Leadership. The executive floor felt different when she entered. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating spaces once associated exclusively with Preston's authority. Yet Camille made no effort to erase the past. Family photographs remained. Historical awards stayed in place. Company milestones continued to line the hallways. Great organizations moved forward by building upon foundations, not by pretending history never existed. Throughout the day, she met with department heads, legal teams, technology directors, and employee representatives. She listened more than she spoke. She asked thoughtful questions. She requested detailed reports. She focused on solutions rather than blame. The effect was immediate. Anxiety slowly gave way to confidence. Across the city, Preston sat alone inside a private office belonging to one of his attorneys. Documents covered the conference table before him. Every page led to the same conclusion. The transfer was final. He stared through the window, overlooking the Hudson River, and replayed recent months in his mind. Missed conversations. Dismissed concerns. Assumptions he never questioned. Success had convinced him that loyalty would always remain exactly where he left it. He had mistaken silence for weakness. Meanwhile, Serena experienced a different kind of awakening. Invitations that once arrived daily suddenly became less frequent. Reporters who previously sought her attention now pursued larger stories. The sapphire necklace remained in her possession, yet somehow it felt heavier than before. Not because of its gemstones, because she finally understood what it represented. It was never merely jewelry. It was a symbol of a life she could never replace. As evening approached, Camille stood alone inside the executive office overlooking Manhattan. The city glowed beneath the fading light. Golden reflections stretched across glass towers. Traffic moved like rivers of light between streets. She remembered the young woman who had once worked beside Preston in tiny rented offices, believing hard work could build extraordinary things. That woman still existed. The difference was simple. She no longer needed anyone else's recognition to understand her value. The empire remained standing, stronger than ever. And for the first time, the woman who had quietly carried it for years was finally visible. 3 weeks later, the attention surrounding Veiled Dominion Group had not disappeared. If anything, it had intensified. Financial magazines called it one of the most unexpected leadership transitions in recent corporate history. Investors praised the company's stability. Market confidence continued to rise. Under Camille's leadership, several long-delayed initiatives had already begun producing results. Yet none of those developments attracted as much attention as the announcement scheduled for Friday afternoon. A press conference, open to shareholders, media outlets, and industry leaders. The grand auditorium inside the company's headquarters filled quickly. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters reviewed notes. Television crews adjusted lighting equipment. Outside, autumn sunlight reflected across Manhattan's glass towers, bathing the city in soft gold. Camille stood backstage reviewing a brief statement. She wore a tailored ivory suit accented by simple pearl earrings. Elegant, confident, unburdened. For the first time in many years, she felt no need to prove anything. The truth had already done that for her. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Jonathan Mercer entered. "There is someone who wishes to speak with you before the event begins." Camille looked up. She already knew who it would be. Moments later, Preston stepped into the room. The difference between this man and the one who had stood beneath the gala chandeliers weeks earlier was impossible to ignore. He still carried himself with dignity, but the certainty that once surrounded him had faded. Reality had a way of removing illusions. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt familiar, not uncomfortable, simply honest. Preston finally looked at her. I spent years believing the company needed me more than I needed anyone else. His voice was calm. I was wrong. Camille listened without interruption. Preston glanced toward the window overlooking the city. The more I reviewed everything, the more I realized how much of our success came from decisions you made, strategies you designed, risks you prevented, problems you solved before anyone else even saw them. He paused. Including me. Camille remained composed. Years ago, those words might have healed something. Today, they simply acknowledged what had always been true. Preston reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed a velvet box. He placed it on the table between them. Serena returned this. Camille opened the box. The sapphire necklace rested inside. Light from the window touched the stone, sending blue reflections across the polished surface. For a moment, memories returned. Her mother's smile. Her mother's voice. The promise hidden inside a simple lesson about self-worth. Preston lowered his gaze. I am sorry, Camille. Not because I lost my position. Not because I lost control. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the person standing beside me. The words carried no excuses. No manipulation. No expectation. Only regret. Camille gently closed the box. Then she looked at him with kindness rather than anger. I forgive you, Preston. Relief flickered across his face. But before hope could follow, she continued. Forgiveness and return are not the same thing. The truth settled softly between them. Neither resisted it. Neither argued. Some chapters were meant to be understood, not rewritten. Outside, applause echoed through the auditorium as guests prepared for the press conference. Camille picked up the velvet box and turned toward the door. The sapphire had come home. Everything else belonged to the past. The auditorium lights softened as Camille stepped onto the stage. Hundreds of guests filled the room. Journalists sat shoulder to shoulder with investors, executives, and employees. Beyond the towering glass walls, the evening skyline of Manhattan shimmered beneath a sky painted with gold and blue. The city looked endless, full of possibilities, full of second chances. Camille stood behind the podium and allowed the silence to settle naturally. She did not rush. She did not perform. Confidence no longer required proving itself. The sapphire necklace rested once again around her neck. Its blue light caught the glow of the chandeliers, reflecting small fragments of brilliance across the stage. For a brief moment, she thought of her mother. The lessons, the sacrifices, the quiet strength that had carried her through every difficult chapter. Then she began to speak. Not about betrayal, not about loss, not about revenge. She spoke about responsibility, about leadership, about building organizations that outlast individual ambitions. She thanked employees who had devoted years of their lives to the company. She recognized mentors who had helped guide its growth. She outlined a vision focused on innovation, opportunity, and long-term stability. The audience listened carefully. By the time she finished, the room rose in applause. Not because she had defeated someone, because she had earned their trust. In the months that followed, the transformation continued. Vale Dominion Group expanded into new markets. Employee development programs received record investments. Scholarship initiatives opened doors for students from underserved communities. Partnerships supporting women entrepreneurs across the country became a cornerstone of the company's public mission. Camille personally established the Brooks Foundation, named in honor of her mother. Its purpose was simple: to help talented women build futures no one could take away from them. The foundation quickly became one of the most respected charitable organizations in the nation. Meanwhile, Preston gradually stepped away from public attention. Time gave him perspective. He no longer measured success through headlines or applause. Occasionally, he would see interviews featuring Camille and recognize the same qualities that had existed from the very beginning. The difference was that now the world could see them too. One spring evening, nearly a year later, Camille stood on the terrace of the foundation's new headquarters overlooking the Hudson River. Children laughed in a nearby courtyard. Young entrepreneurs attended mentorship workshops inside the building. The city glowed beneath the setting sun. Jonathan Mercer approached, carrying several reports. The foundation reached another milestone today, he said with a smile. Camille looked toward the horizon. That is wonderful. Jonathan glanced at the sapphire necklace. Your mother would be proud. Camille touched the stone gently. I hope so. The evening breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the terrace garden. For the first time in a very long time, there was no weight on her shoulders. No anger. No regret. Only peace. Years earlier, she had believed losing something precious would break her. Instead, it revealed who she truly was. The empire stood stronger than ever. The foundation changed thousands of lives. The necklace had returned home. And the woman who once walked silently through rooms filled with powerful people had become a symbol of dignity, wisdom, and grace. Sometimes the greatest victory is not taking revenge. It is becoming so strong, so complete, and so fulfilled that the people who underestimated you become nothing more than a chapter in a story whose ending belongs entirely to you.